Okay, well, good morning. We're just going to polish off section 10 this morning, and then we'll go in and begin with section 11 with Guthrie. Let me just make sure I do have 11. Okay. Okay, so we are now finishing up the doctrine of human beings. Let's just flip the page, see where we are. Okay, yeah, here we go. You're right, 10. Good call, Suhail. All right, so we talked last week about ways human beings relate to one another, right? We talked about seeing and being seen, remember? Mm-hmm. To be able to look into the eye of the other could be painful, right? We can see things in ourselves, maybe, we don't want to see. Speaking and listening, because looks can be deceiving, right? I mean, how long has it been since we've heard the term, right? You can't judge a book by its cover, speaking and listening. And then helping and being helped. True helping is not scratching one another's back, relying on the help from the other as well. So, right, when we help one another, we don't help because we want something in return. There are organizations that do that. The church should not be one of them. We help because Christ tells us to help, right? We do because Christ tells us to do, not because we're awaiting some prize or we're going to get something in return. That should not be the reason why a Christian or the church should help. And it's also relying on the help of each other, right? So we have to be open to receiving help. Or else, that's part of it, right? We talked last week, I think we ended last week with talking about Jesus washing the feet of his disciples, right? And the importance of that. It's not just, okay, they had dirty feet, they need to be, clean before they enter the room. It was a lesson of serving, right? Jesus does it because he is serving the disciples, but it is also a teaching moment, as many of what Jesus did were teaching moments, right? I do this to you, so you do this to or for each other. Right, exactly. All right, so now we're on our last and final piece of being human, what it means to be human. And this is entitled Me, Myself, and I. This is a chunk. All right. We have emphasized as strongly as possible that human life in the image of God is life in community with God and fellow human beings. This means that Christians must stand firmly against all rugged individualism. The individualistic desire to be independent, self-sufficient, and self-centered is inhuman, right? Now, this is tough, especially for us Americans. Right? We have been raised since we were sprouts to be fiercely independent, right? Think about the birth of our nation, right? We wanted independence, we want to be free, and then it's also instilled in each individual, right? So this is where sometimes it can be difficult for some people, because as Christianity goes, it's not about us being fiercely independent. What is it about? It's about the opposite. Mm-hmm. We must be what? Dependent. Excellent. Good, Don. We must be dependent upon God. Mm-hmm. Right? In fact, today I'm preaching out of Romans for Trinity Sunday. My words are Trinity Sunday. On this topic is that we are indebted to God. But not indebted as a slave is indebted to a master, but as we are indebted to God, for the gift of God's grace, right? But we're indebted as children, as heirs, right? And so this is something that many people might have issues with, but we must be dependent upon God. We are not created, Christians believe we're not created to be, again, lone wolves, right? There is no you cannot be a lone wolf. We are part of community, and we must be dependent on God. So, to be the rugged individual goes counter of what God is trying to teach us to do. And this, of course, I'm speaking specifically about our relationship with God. Right? All right. Now, having said that, now we must add finally that the doctrine of creation in the image of God preserves individuality, just as strongly as it condemns individualism. You say, oh, Guthrie, that's confusing. What do you mean by that? Well, a genuine relationship between ourselves, there was an and there, excuse me, ourselves, my eyes from the pollen, ourselves and others is possible only when there is a distinction between us in which we remain who we are and others remain who they are. To attempt to do away with our own or others' unique individuality is to make a real relationship between us impossible, and is just as inhuman as individualism. So we mustn't become fiercely independent to where we no longer rely upon God, but individuality is important because it says, we are all different, right? Whether we're talking about me or Suhail or Don or Alan, we're all different. We all come from different places. We all come from different situations, family life, where we grew up, where we went to school, what we saw. You might hear sometimes in sitcoms, sometimes you hear when someone's a little off, people might say he wasn't hugged too much. He wasn't hugged enough as a child, and everyone laughs. But that statement shows that there is, each of us come to the table with our own experiences, right? So you cannot ignore individuality. We are who we are, right? It doesn't mean that there's no room for improvement. We all do as we try to become more Christ-like, but you still are who you are, and that's not a bad thing.
Even
right?
identical twins.
Right, yeah. Have their own individuality.
Yep.
They're close,
Yeah.
but yeah, they still are individuals. So it's kind of like there's a balance between individuality, which is a good thing, right? We must not, you can't ignore that, or we shouldn't be upset about that. That's who we are, right? God does not want a church full of drones, right? That's not what God is seeking. But we must avoid individualism, right? We must understand that, we have to be dependent upon God, right? So that's a difference. There is a kind of Christian talk about self-denial, self-sacrifice, and tolerance that is profoundly inhuman and unchristian. And there is a kind of self-assertion only regarded by Christians with suspicion that is genuinely human and Christian. Think first of our relation to God. There is a kind of spirituality in which people seek such complete unity with God that they literally try to lose themselves in God. In giving themselves totally to prayer, meditation, and devotional exercises, they seek so completely to deny themselves that there is no longer any self-awareness, but only God awareness. Right? Sometimes we think of monks, right, in their self-devotion.
Yeah.
But such spirituality means not only that they have abandoned their fellow human beings in their exclusive and paradoxically self-centered concern for unity with God, but that any real relationship with God is impossible. It is far better, like Job or Jeremiah or the psalmist, to get mad at God, argue, or even fight with God, than to be so spiritual that no dialogue or confrontation is possible, either from God's side or from mine, because I have in fact withdrawn myself from God by trying to pretend that there is no difference between us, who we are, and what we think and want. So what we're seeing is the dangers of extremism, right, on this side. Or to take the husband and wife relationship. Sometimes a husband or wife thinks that to love the partner means to sacrifice all one's own desires. Some people smile, some people cringe, right?
Need to watch you.
Right, exactly. I won't say it. I'm online, right? So, whatever you say, dear, one simply dissolves himself or herself into the other, becoming a carbon copy of the other. They've been married so long you can't tell them apart. Right, the sayings. Such a relationship may make for peace in a marriage, but it is not love. It really means that one partner has so withdrawn from the other or has been so absorbed into the other that real loving and being loved are impossible. How can one love and be loved if he or she is not even there anymore? Right? It takes two individual self-affirming persons to make a marriage. There can be no we unless there are two I's. A political or social community that tramples individual rights, including the right not to conform or prevailing conservative or liberal correct thinking, is no more a genuine community than one in which the insistence on individual rights is really an excuse for social irresponsibility and anarchy. As individuals exist only in social relationships, so societies can endure only when the variety and uniqueness of individuals are not allowed but protected and encouraged. There are no individual rights without civil rights, and no civil rights without individual rights. So again, Guthrie is saying, don't go to the extreme on either side, right? There are importances, right, for the individual, and there are importances for, civil, for communal rights. In a religious dialogue between representatives of different Christian traditions, or between Christians and followers of other religious traditions, is not a dialogue at all when the two parties are so tolerant of each other and so eager to make peace between the two camps that they cover over, ignore, or deny the real theological and ethical differences between them. When that happens, how can either side have anything interesting to say or to the other or learn anything from the other? Might not unquestioning agreement with whatever others say actually means indifference toward them, a sign that we do not want to be bothered by the difficulty of a serious conversation with them? And might we not show that we really care about them and respect what they believe just when we take the time and trouble to lay out for them who we are and why we believe what we do? Invite them to do the same for us, and then have a friendly but honest debate about our differences, so long as both sides demonstrate a genuine openness to listen and learn, as well as eagerness to speak and instruct. Cannot self-asserting opposition be a sign of a genuine other-affirming conversation? Right, so Guthrie now says when it comes to interreligious dialogue, don't candy coat it. Don't whitewash what you believe. Sometimes when we get to problematic texts, even within our own canon, like when Jesus says, "I am the bread and the life. I am the only way to the Father." Sometimes we want to rationalize that away. Sometimes we want to, look, this is our tradition. Don't apologize for it, and just says this is our tradition. And we're not to be ashamed of our book, right? Now, it doesn't mean that, you run around and saying, well, you're going to hell, and you're going to hell, and you're going to hell, and I think you're going to hell, right? Because we're not called to be gatekeepers either, right? But this is to add to open dialogue, because every other faith tradition or religion has its own uniqueness as well. Right, and this opens up to, as Guthrie says, real dialogue. How can we learn anything from each other if we kind of make it all mushy? You're not learning anything. You're holding back. So Guthrie says there's a way to do it, but be real with each other. Open, have real conversations. So the problem of finding a right balance between an emphasis on human individuality and an emphasis on human community is a fundamental problem that confronts us in all our personal and social relationships. There are no easy or final solutions to it. but we suggest 2 guidelines for dealing with it. 1, as human beings created in the image of God, we can realize our distinctive individuality only in and for the sake of community with God and other people. And we can live in true community with them only as we respect, preserve, and defend our own unique individuality and that of other people. True individuality and true community cannot be separated. Each has to be understood in inseparable connection with the other. So, if what is most important to you is the dignity, freedom, and rights of the individual, remember this: individual life that ignores or destroys life in community with God and other people, especially people who are different from you, is inhuman. And if what is most important for you is a solidarity, unity, and life in community, remember this: life in community with God and others that ignores or destroys the dignity, freedom, and rights of individuals, especially those who are different from you, is also inhuman. Right? So Guthrie is painting this picture of balance. So we must preserve and defend the right of community, but we should also do the same for the individuality of others and ourselves. Right? Again, it's balance. Because it is human life in the image of God, we seek to understand and realize as we struggle to legitimate self-assertion and life in community, we may expect to find help with our struggle as we continually ponder afresh the story of how the God in whose image we are created and how Jesus, the faithful human being in God's image, did it. According to Scripture, how was God faithful to both God's own personal integrity and freedom, and to God's will for community with God's sinful people? How did Jesus uncompromisingly live his own life and fulfill his own particular task in such a way that he lived at the same time totally and unreservedly for God and for other people? Every chapter in this book could be read as one answer to these questions. What is your answer? Who are we? Who am I? We are human beings created in the image of God. And what does that mean? We can summarize everything we have said in this chapter and everything we say in this whole book by saying, you shall love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, and with all your mind, and you shall love your neighbor as yourself. All right? So,
Pretty good.
yeah. Any questions? So that's how Guthrie ties up this chapter. So, when we think about the importance of... Hold on one second. My wife just texted me. They're leaving in the morning. Why?